G'day everyone, welcome back to the Talking Leadership Podcast. Thank you for joining me. Today's guest began her career at 19 and for the following 10 years she worked as a management consultant helping companies from the $200,000 mark to the $130 million mark turnover get the most out of their businesses. At the age of 23, she was a head consultant for a small boutique firm in Sydney. Her work has allowed her to clearly see and to build incredible companies that are successful in achieving their goals. And she relies on three key things: hiring reliable, overachieving employees, designing and organizing the team and its workflow, and finally, leveraging and retaining staff through great management. She now runs her own company, Talent X, a unique and revolutionary recruitment agency. Can I welcome to the podcast, Marnie Jones? How are you, mate?
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me, mate.
Thank you for being here. So we're talking leadership, obviously. So before we get into the questions proper, just for the listeners, give us a bit of a history as to how you got into a leadership role and starting your own business. What was your leadership journey?
Well, I started my career when I was 19, as you mentioned before. I got a traineeship in a business consultancy firm, and I started, cleaning dishes and preparing materials and getting the workshop ready for clients. And luckily, what we were teaching in this consultancy firm was a curriculum. So I didn't need what a lot of other consultants need, which is a full experience of running a business. I just needed to know that curriculum and how to apply it to different industries, which does require experience. But my point being that I could learn it at such a young age. And so I learned this curriculum over time. I actually got my first client when I was 19, and I ended up really taking to the curriculum really well. I was a natural with it. Clients really enjoyed the way that I was delivering that curriculum. And then a couple of years later, I was kind of thrust into a bit of a leadership role. I mean, leadership is a tricky one because when you hear leadership, I'm like, do you mean management? Because they could be two different things, So I get it. Management and leadership, I find, are a bit different. I find a lot of the time founders are leaders and managers are managers. Do you know what I mean? They're slightly different. But anyway, I was kind of thrown into this semi-management role. And I was actually then at that point helping to develop that curriculum. So all the stuff started coming to me. I had staff I was the youngest person in the company, actually. I was starting to get given the toughest clients. And it's interesting because also I was required to be a leader with my clients. So I started to get the toughest clients, and they would then look to me for direction and advice and assistance. And so my journey to leadership initially was kind of thrust into it a little bit unwillingly, but then kind of hit this, I'll be honest with you, a bit of an egotistical phase where because I had, the toughest clients or the biggest clients or people started coming to me, I started to get a bit of a big head, and I was like, well, I'm the leader now. And, kind of, I think took advantage of that at some points as well. So I consulted for a few years, and then basically went out on my own after that company decided to change direction. So they decided to teach a different curriculum, and I took that as an opportunity to go and have a life, because I had been at that point working for 7 years and hadn't had a boyfriend, haven't worked from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. And so I didn't have a life. So I was like, right, I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to go and travel the States. So I went with a mate in a van, and we drove around the southern states of the US. And long story short, missed consulting very much. It slowly crept into my life and decided to open Talent X, where we offered both consulting work and hiring or recruitment as well. And here we are.
Wow, that's an incredible pathway. I guess one question to ask and something to clarify, and thank you for bringing this up actually, is I've dropped the discussion around the difference between leadership and management. And it's interesting that you bring it back up, because the leadership is about people, in essence, for me, and management is about processes and outcomes and the management side of things, not the leading people side of things. So important distinction to have there. And obviously in your travels, you've encountered leaders and you've been around the place, and you said you got to a point where maybe you were not overestimating your skills, but you were at the top of your game, I guess.
I was overestimating my skills.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to say that. You said that's cool. That's cool.
That's accurate.
Look, to be honest, I think we all do that to one degree or the other. So you're not alone there. And I think a bit of backing yourself is a healthy thing. My question to you, after all of that experience and meeting the people that you've met, define leadership for me.
Yeah. So look, I've worked with hundreds of companies, thousands of staff, and I would summarize, there's two sides of leadership. There's a soft side and a hard side. This is the way I look at it. Overall, I would surmise it to be the ability to give and enforce orders. So if I tell you to do something, or I make sure that gets done, So that is really, when you think about a leader, it's like if you and I had a group of people who were out in the jungle and suddenly we got lost, someone would have to take charge. That person would then go, right, Eric, you go get water, Marnie, you go do blah. And they would give orders and become the leader, and we would follow this person. Now, of course, you want those orders to be towards something that's good, something that people agree with, something that people want to do. And that's what makes, I feel, a great leader. So that's what I would say is leadership, is the ability to give and enforce orders. Bit of a different definition, because it's not a soft definition. It's quite a rough definition.
And there's no right or wrong here. I think there's room in the discussion on this topic for different views of leadership. And I myself don't personally subscribe to hard and soft elements of leadership. For me, dealing with human beings is probably the hardest thing you're ever going to do. To me, it's not a soft skill, but I get why you use the term. I think it's often used in HR speak quite often, that there are the hard skills and the soft skills. And it's the ironic bit is dealing with the minutiae of issues that human beings can bring up when you're in a leadership role. There's nothing easy about some of the crap that you have to deal with. And given the kinds of businesses that you deal with, before we got into the podcast, you said businesses with 15 to a couple of hundred employees. That's the scope of the businesses that you've worked with, yes?
Yeah, so the biggest company I work with in terms of turnover was 130 mil, and then in size it was 150 staff.
That's quite a big organization. We're not talking small there, and that's not an insignificant turnover number either. This segues nicely into the next area, and I didn't coin the phrase the lonely road of leadership. So leaders have to make decisions. Leaders are often, there's a demand as part of the role of leadership to take decisions. Is leadership a lonely road, or as lonely as you make it?
I would say it is very lonely. Depends because this is a thing, being a business owner and being a leader are not necessarily the same thing. You can be a leader in someone else's company. So that's why I find the topic of leadership a bit challenging at times, because I'm like, well, it really depends. I think as a business owner, I find it very lonely. I think if you have a management team and you're all leaders working together and it's not your business, potentially not as lonely. But I do feel part of leadership is continuing beyond the challenges that get faced and overcoming them, which I know is very flowery and said a lot. But even just before jumping on this podcast, I was talking to a friend and I was like, isn't it funny how we agree, or we set up these companies, or we set up these roles, or we agree to do certain things, and because of the commitment we've agreed to, we pigeonhole ourselves into responsibility. Because I said to her, I was like, how many times would we have given up and been like, screw this, I'm not paying these wages this week, and screw this, I'm not doing that. But we can't, because we're stuck, because we signed a lease, we've got employees, we have to pay that rent anyway. So then it forces us to overcome. So you know how people like, you've got to find it within yourself to overcome these challenges. I'm like, no, you have to set up yourself in a way that you cannot do anything but overcome the challenges, because otherwise I feel like if we don't put those things in place, those obligations there, even though I feel like I tend to achieve quite a lot in comparison to what my goals are. But my point being, I think the loneliness of it is because we pigeonhole ourselves into responsibility. And I think that's a good thing and a challenging thing.
I haven't heard it put that way, but that makes some sense to me, because at the end of the day, as a leader, you have obligations and you can't not meet them, particularly if you take on staff. And I understand what you're saying, that once you set up the ecosystem to drive your business forward, then yeah, you're signing up for some stuff that you can't walk away from unless you're prepared to make money and make other people's lives difficult that you've taken on as employees. Marnie, measuring success. So you've obviously started your business. There's going to be good days and bad days, but from your perspective as the business founder, the owner, what does measuring success look like for you?
For me, it's when clients are happy, and it's when I have enough profit coming in that it's all worth it. They're the two things that I suppose staff are part of it too, I should say. What a terrible leader of me, Eric, to not even mention my staff. No, but my staff are happy. I guess that's why. Clients, I think that's the whole reason you're doing it, right? It's like, even if you're making money, I mean, I'd feel terrible about myself if my clients didn't like what we did. So making sure I feel like giving them something that is above standard in our industry. And we do really make a difference in our clients' companies. And that makes me feel very good about myself. I'm a very selfish person, Eric. I don't do anything unless I want to do it. I don't do anything unless I feel good about it. I help people because it makes me feel good. I know that sounds really like backwards, but it's true. I feel terrible if I don't help anyone. So I would say client, feedback or client's opinion of you, and then how much profit it's bringing me, because that's when I know I'm going through a rough time, because I'm like, well, hold on. If I was making money right now, would I care about this as much? Like, how much profit you're making, how much money you're making as a business owner, not necessarily as a leader, I feel will determine how much of a problem something really is.
That's an interesting distinction, and it's one hasn't been put to me a lot, but what has been put to me quite significantly in my discussions with other leaders, and I think this drives you, and correct me if I've got this wrong, is you have a set of values that you work to, and something drives you, and that's important to you in the business, and that varies from person to person. It's always I think it's a uniquely, not unique to leaders, but what drives you is what will drive your success or not. And it sounds like getting value for your customer, but getting paid as a result of that is why you're in business. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in a for-profit mode, and you'd be working in a not-for-profit or volunteering. So, okay, now I get that. Leader capabilities, Marnie. So again, this is from your perspective, and I'm not after a list, but what do you see are those key capabilities in a leader that you think are essential for effective leadership?
So I feel one thing is to not project your own emotion and reaction on other people. So that's one of the key differences I've observed between good managers and leaders over my experience and not, is I'll sit in a room and we'll be in a strategy session, let's just say, and you've got the leader sitting there, and they might throw around their emotion or a reaction on other people or confusion. And I find that that's a trait of staff, not a trait of a leader. So a leader has no place or no right, in my opinion, to do that. And that comes with the job. And that's also part of what makes it so hard, is because if you don't have this, I guess this loops into the loneliness of leadership. If you don't have some kind of outlet or some person you can do that with, it becomes a bit harder, because there are certain things that we can never put on our staff.
Is there a set of capabilities that you think have been exposed as not as developed as they could be in the leaders that you're seeing?
That's a good question. I would say removing any fixed ideas that you have. I think what COVID has done is it's really thrown us into this world where we have to reassess everything that we are doing and how we're doing it. So the leaders that evolve from that, I find, are willing to look at their own ideas and go, okay, am I willing to change this? Like, for example, having to work from home. I'm just going to use that because it's just, I get asked that like probably 3 times a week. And other leaders are like, you know what, I don't mind as long as the role's done. I'm going to just adjust these things. I'm going to make this really known. I'm going to organize that role. I'm going to put in key KPIs. You want to work from home? I don't care. I don't give a shit. Go for it. So whether that's good or bad, I think only time will tell. Over time, we'll see how valuable that is. But I guess it's agility and adaptation, pivoting, or whatever you want to call it. But it is the ability to step back and look at your own ideas and go, are these fixed, and should I look at them, and should I move them?
Flexibility in leadership, I think, is coming out quite a bit. And I'm glad that I'm hearing that consistently, because if it wasn't COVID, if it was some other shock in the business environment, the ability to, probably pivot's the right word, be strategic in your thinking around what that means is, I think, caught some people out. I don't think people were deficient in that thinking, is that no one expected what happened to have happened, and we now have the opportunity to deal with it. And I think your point is well made.
We'll see something else, Eric, on that. Yep. And this is something that is, I think, so important in business. I will say, to contradict myself, that good leadership is solidifying what you know works and keeping it there and maintaining it. I see so many businesses change things that do not need to be changed, or something's going really well and then they're like, I'm going to change that person's job. Why? Because they're doing really well. Then keep them in that job. They're doing really well. Keep them there, for God's sake. Or we got, with this amazing profit, I'm going to change the product because I don't think anyone wants it. Whatever it is, right? But if we don't really solidify and hamper down on what we know works based on data and results, not opinion or emotion, but based on actual data, I find innovation and agility and all these things actually destabilize a company in a very negative way. So I think if you're looking to be agile and you're looking to evolve, you have to first hamper down what you know absolutely works, that you never want to change, because that's what makes your business a good business, and then evolve all the extra ancillary things on the side.
Again, not having run some of these businesses that you're talking about, playing to your strengths is important. I guess playing to your strengths but being agile are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So if you can do both, then why not do both? Yeah, no, point well made. All right, Marnie, the nature versus nurture question. Are leaders born or are they made?
Of course they're made. No, I think some are born. I think if you have a good bossy trait, I'm a little bit bossy, so I obviously naturally kind of evolved that kind of person. But I think we have natural personality traits that we have as children or that we grow up with that are valuable to leadership. But I think leadership can absolutely be taught, and I think it can be created as long as there's a willingness there to improve and to want to work on that.
Let me ask this. As a leader yourself, do you believe in being self-reflective and seeking feedback on your leadership?
No, I'm always right. And if you doubt me, no, I do, but reluctantly, I have to admit. That's one thing. If my partner ever listens to this, he'll laugh. I don't like being wrong very much. That's why that's why I never say anything I'm not entirely sure of. And I'll put little caveats in there just in case I made the wrong decision. But I think I don't like criticism very well, but I do seek it because I can't help it, and I do ask for it. So I think it is important. Yes. Do I like it? No, I don't like it.
Oh, you're being honest. I think feedback is difficult at the best of times. I've often thought in the discussions that I've had to this point and with my professional cohort, my friends, family around this topic area, as much as people want to talk about leadership to any degree, that most people will say they're happy to think about what they've done. But when you add the element of what if somebody gave you feedback on something that you did, particularly decision making, I think the ego is very much something that is something that people worry about. And I'm chuffed to hear you say that it's difficult, because I think that's the truth of it, that most people aren't seeking it. But I think if you can get over that hump, being able to take feedback, I think makes you a more effective leader. That's a personal view. And that's
Absolutely.
not to say that you're starting from a low base, mate. I'm just suggesting that we all need a bit of tough love sometimes. And I guess it's the way that it's delivered. So I'm not an advocate for somebody saying, oh, you're stuffed up and you're crap at this and you're crap. Like, if you get harsh language at you, your back is going to get up straight away. But if somebody says it with a bit of thinking involved and saying, I'm saying this to hopefully help you think about what has happened, I think it's all in the delivery, and that ability to measure your communications in that way is an art form in itself. And I've seen people do it well. I've seen it done very badly, and it can have unintended consequences as well, because people put value judgments behind what people say. And that's the thing that I think makes people uncomfortable. If you give somebody harsh, critical, but positive feedback, some people will not take it that way, no matter how well phrased it is. It can have that darker side to it, and it's the reality of being human. So I appreciate the response.
As a leader, even though I don't like it, I have to say, as you're talking, I'm like, you know what? I actually seek it all the time. But the way that I do it is, if I'm with someone and I can see on their face, I'm with a staff member and I'm asking them to do something, or I'm directing them to do something, and I can see they're in disagreement, I always ask. I don't ignore it. I'm like, hey, just do it. Go away. I'm like, hey, what's that look on your face? And they're like, oh, I'm like, no, come on, what is it? You don't agree? Or actually, I ask, like, what is it? You don't want to do this? You don't have time? Come on, tell me. And they're like, no, I just think blah. I'm like, okay, cool, fair enough. And sometimes, like, I just think the way you delivered it, even a few weeks ago, I had a staff member who really pushed back on me. She was like, I just feel you're being very unfair. And I feel like, and I was like, okay, well, if you're very gentle and casual, but you can be honest still, you can have that type of dialogue. So I would reply and be like, look, I really don't feel I am. I feel this is your job. And I feel, we have this back and forth. And she's like, well, I feel like just the way you're doing it is just really making me feel awful. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to do that. So even though I say that, if you are soft but honest in your approach with that, you will always get feedback. And it won't be received as hard because you've requested it and you're seeking it as well, I find.
Yeah, it's often difficult when you're giving feedback to another human being. There's always that to be mindful of. And it's why I think some people gravitate to leadership, because they want to take those kind of discussions and have a hard discussion as part of what they do, and why others run a mile and don't ever want to have that kind of responsibility, because there's difficult conversations to be had. I'm not talking about small things. I'm talking about when you might need to make a critical decision. Marnie, before I go, and I appreciate your time on this, You're dealing with leaders on a regular basis. You're dealing with organizations. What do you see in the coming, say, 12 months, 2 years around the leadership topic that you think is coming out of potentially left field that people aren't paying attention to, that you are paying more attention to?
I would say a lot of leaders are going to find it challenging to settle in on what works with teams because we've been thrown so many hurdles and requests from candidates when we're hiring them. And I want to work these hours, or I want this flexibility, or I want to work from home, or I want this pay. And because we're forced into these types of decisions, I think leaders are going to have to really make time to reassess what those decisions mean and what effect that's had on their business. Because if they don't do that and they don't step back and have a look at what really works based on data and facts, not opinion or emotion, I think that it might end up biting them. So I think leaders should be looking at, from a data perspective, the cost and the return of all of these staff decisions, because they do have a cost and they do have a return. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of that when everyone is going into agreement that we must do these things to get candidates, or we must open up work from home, and we must be accommodating to these requests. So I feel like that's something that will catch a lot of people off guard if they're not aware of it and if they don't mentally prepare for that.
A valuable insight, my friend. So before we end the podcast, talk to me about TalentX.
So TalentX is a hybrid of recruitment and consultancy. It's what I've coined a people agency. So we do standard recruitment, which is run by one half of my business. And then the other half, we do consulting, where we help organize and structure companies. We help them blueprint the best way to actually run their business and build a structure and infrastructure that gets them out of the day-to-day, gets the owners out of the day-to-day, and allows them to expand and grow without all the growing pains that come with it. And alongside that, we have management training as well. So we tend to work with clients for 12 to 18 months typically. So we're very picky with our clients. We love our clients very much, but we really are there for the success of teams, which is why we call it a people agency.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So Marnie, in the podcast description, I'll put a link to TalentX and I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile. So thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you, Eric.
For those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. Thank you for joining me again, and we'll catch everyone on the next podcast.